It started over coffee. Just a regular Sunday morning. Sunlight through the kitchen window, the smell of toast in the air, the kind of quiet that usually feels like comfort. I was sitting at the table, scrolling through my phone, waiting for her to come down. She always took her time on Sundays, wrapped up in her own world upstairs. When she finally appeared, she looked tired. Not sleepy tired, but the kind of tired that sits deep in your bones. She poured herself a cup, didn't say much, just stood by the counter staring out the window. I watched her for a moment, that familiar mix of love and worry bubbling up inside me. She'd been working so hard lately, taking on all these freelance projects, saying no to anything that felt too stable or too corporate. I kept thinking about that marketing job offer she turned down last month. Good pay, benefits, a real team. It made sense. To me anyway. I cleared my throat. Tried to sound casual. You know, I was thinking about that job again. The one with the agency downtown. They seemed really impressed with you. Maybe it's worth another look? Just to have something steady while you build your portfolio. She didn't turn around right away. Just kept looking out the window. When she finally did, her face had changed. All the softness was gone. Her eyes were sharp, almost cold, Mom, she said, her voice low but tight. We've talked about this, I know, I said, holding up my hands like I was backing off. I'm just saying, it's not easy out there. I want you to be okay. That's the problem, she snapped. You always think you know what's best for me. You see me struggling for 5 minutes and you jump in like I can't handle it? Like I'm still 16 and need you to pick my clothes or check my homework. I opened my mouth to argue. To tell her I was just trying to help, that I only wanted good things for her. But before I could get a word out, she leaned forward, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the counter. Stop controlling my life, she said, each word clear and hard as stone. I'm an adult. The words hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught. All the arguments I'd been ready to make just vanished. I looked at her, really looked. Saw the frustration, yes, but underneath it, something else. Something raw and exhausted. Like she'd been carrying this weight for a long time and I hadn't even noticed. Or worse, I'd been adding to it. My instinct was to defend myself. To list all the times I'd supported her, driven her to auditions. Stayed up late helping her with school projects, cheered her on at every little win. Wasn't that love? But looking into her eyes, I saw that my version of love felt like a cage to her. And in that moment, arguing felt like slamming the door shut even harder. So I didn't say anything. I just nodded once, slowly. Then I pushed my chair back, stood up and walked out. Not dramatically, not slamming doors. Just left. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door, stepped outside into the cool morning air, and closed the door softly behind me. I didn't look back. I walked for a long time. Past the park. Past the little bakery that always smelled like cinnamon. Past the bus stop where we used to wait together when she was in high school. My mind was racing, but my body felt numb. That silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of everything I hadn't said, everything I'd misunderstood, everything I'd gotten wrong. Back home hours later, I found her room exactly as she'd left it that morning. Bed unmade, clothes draped over the chair, a half-finished sketch on her desk. I sat on the edge of her bed, running my hand over the quilt she'd picked out when she was 12. It felt like touching a ghost. Where had I lost her? When did my care start feeling like control? I thought about all the little things. The way I'd text her 3 times if she didn't answer right away. The way I'd gently steer conversations toward safer career choices. The way I'd offer unsolicited advice about her friends, her apartment, her schedule. I told myself it was because I cared. But maybe it was also because I was scared. Scared she'd fail. Scared she'd get hurt. Scared that if she made her own way, she wouldn't need me anymore. But she'd just told me, loud and clear, that needing me didn't mean wanting me to run her life. The days that followed were strange. The house felt too big, too quiet. I'd catch myself picking up my phone to text her something silly, a meme. A photo of the neighbor's cat, a reminder about the weather, and then stop. My thumb would hover over her name, but I couldn't press send. What would I even say? Sorry I tried to control you? I miss you? Both felt wrong. Both felt like they'd just push her further away. I started noticing things I never paid attention to before. The way she always organized her pencils by color, the specific playlist she listened to when she was working, the way she'd hum under her breath when she was concentrating. These small pieces of her scattered through the house felt like clues to a person I realized I didn't fully know anymore. Or maybe I'd stopped seeing her clearly a long time ago, too busy trying to shape her into someone I thought she should be. One afternoon, found an old shoebox in the back of her closet. Inside were ticket stubs from concerts we'd gone to, dried flowers from her first school dance, a silly birthday card I'd made her when she was 10. I sat on the floor of her closet for a long time, holding that card, remembering how proud she'd looked, showing it to her friends. Back then, my involvement was welcome. Needed even. But time moves. People grow. And I'd stayed stuck in the same role. Blind to the fact that the child who needed me to tie her shoes was now a woman who needed me to trust her to walk her own path. The silence stretched. A week, 2 weeks. No calls, no texts. Just the hollow echo of my own thoughts in a house that suddenly felt like a museum of a life we used to share. I missed her laugh. I missed her messy hair in the morning. I missed the way she'd roll her eyes at my terrible jokes, but laugh anyway. But more than that, I missed Hertha real her, not the version I'd been trying to protect or guide. I started wondering if I'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. If my fear and my need to be needed had finally pushed her away for good. The guilt was heavy, but beneath it, a quieter, more unsettling feeling began to grow. Understanding. Maybe she was right. Maybe my love had been tangled up with control for longer than I wanted to admit. I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't want to, but because for the first time, I truly understood what she'd asked for. Space, trust, the chance to be seen as the adult she was, not the child I remembered. So I stayed silent. I let the quiet sit between us, heavy and painful, but necessary. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, holding back the urge to fix, to explain, to pull her back into the safety of my orbit. But I did it, because for once, I chose to listen to her words, not just with my ears, but with my actions. And in that silence, something unexpected began to happen. Not between us yet, but within me. The walls I'd built out of worry started to crack. The identity I'd worn so tightly, mother, protector, fixer, started to feel less like armor and more like a costume that no longer fit. Who was I if not the person constantly managing her life? The question scared me, but it also held a strange kind of freedom. The year had just begun, and everything felt broken. But maybe, just maybe, broken things can be put back together in a new way. Stronger, truer. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was the silence, the ache, and the first fragile seed of change taking root in the quiet space I'd finally, reluctantly, made. Spring came in slow and wet that year. Rain tapped against the windows most days, a steady rhythm that matched the quiet inside the house. It wasn't peaceful. It was empty. Too empty. Every room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for a voice that never came. I kept busy. That's what people say, right? Just keep busy. So I cleaned. Not just regular cleaning, but deep, almost frantic cleaning. I scrubbed baseboards I hadn't touched in years. I organized the pantry by expiration date. I folded towels into perfect squares and stacked them like they belonged in a catalog. It gave my hands something to do while my mind circled the same thought over and over. What if she never comes back her? Room became my secret project. I'd go in late at night when the house was darkest. I'd smooth the sheets on her bed even though no one slept there. I'd dust the bookshelf where she kept her favorite novels, their spines cracked from being read too many times. I'd pick up the framed photo on her desk, the one of us at the beach when she was maybe 14. Both of us sunburned and grinning, and hold it for a long time. In the picture, her arm was slung around my shoulders, her head resting on mine. Easy. Natural. Like we fit together perfectly now. The space between us felt like miles. I missed the little things more than the big ones. The way she'd leave her coffee mug on the counter instead of in the dishwasher. The sound of her singing off-key in the shower. The way she'd burst through the front door after work, dropping her bag with a thud and calling out, "Mom, I'm starving." Those ordinary moments had been the fabric of our life together. Now they were gone, leaving only this strange, stretched-out silence. Grocery shopping became an ordeal. I'd stand in the cereal aisle staring at the boxes, trying to remember what she liked. Did she still eat that sugary stuff with the marshmallows? Or had she switched to plain oats like she talked about once I'd buy both? Oh, just in case. Then I'd remember there was no in case anymore. I'd put them back, my cart suddenly feeling too full and too empty at the same time. I started avoiding places we used to go together. The little coffee shop on Elm Street, where we'd meet every other Sunday. The bookstore downtown where we'd spend hours browsing. Even the park bench near the duck pond where we'd sit and talk for hours when she was younger. Seeing those places without her felt like walking through a museum exhibit of someone else's happy life. Friends called. They meant well. They'd ask gently, "How are you holding up? Have you heard from her yet?" I'd give them the same answer every time. "I'm fine." "No, not yet." And then I'd change the subject fast, before they could see how much it hurt. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want their advice. Mostly, I didn't want to admit out loud how lost I felt at night. Lying in bed, the silence pressed down on me. My mind would replay that last conversation. Her voice sharp, my own silence heavy. I'd imagine different endings. What if I'd said I'm sorry instead of walking away? What if I'd told her I'd trust you? What if I'd just hugged her instead of arguing about a job? But I hadn't, and now here I was. Alone with the consequences, one rainy afternoon. I found myself standing in front of the community center bulletin board. Flyers for yoga classes, knitting groups, volunteer opportunities. My eyes landed on one for a gardening club. Meet every Tuesday. Help grow vegetables for the local food bank. No experience needed. Something about the simplicity of idea, the dirt, the seeds, the promise of growth called to me. Maybe it was just something to fill the hours. Maybe it was a tiny step toward feeling useful again, even if only two strangers. The first meeting was awkward. I didn't know anyone. My hands felt clumsy holding the trowel. I planted lettuce seeds too deep and got laughed at gently by a woman with kind eyes and dirt under her nails. But nobody asked about my daughter. Nobody expected me to be anything other than the quiet woman learning how to garden. For 2 hours, I wasn't the mom who pushed her kid away. I was just me, kneeling in the damp earth, focusing on making sure the seedlings had enough space to grow. It wasn't magic. The ache didn't vanish. But for those few hours, it quieted. There was something honest about working with your hands, about caring for something fragile that needed sun and water and patience. It reminded me that growth takes time, that things can look dead for a long time before they push green shoots through the soil. Back home, I started reading. Not novels, but books with titles like Letting Go and The Space Between Us. I read about boundaries, about how love sometimes means stepping back instead of stepping in. It was hard to swallow. It felt like admitting I'd been wrong all along. But the more I read, the more it made sense. My worry hadn't been love. Not really. Real love trusts. Real love gives space. Real love doesn't smother. I began to see my own patterns clearer. How I'd call 3 times if she didn't answer. How I'd offer solutions before she'd even finished describing a problem. How I'd subtly compare her choices to what I thought was safer or smarter. I'd told myself it was because I cared. But maybe it was also because I needed to feel needed. Because watching her become fully independent scared me. Scared me that my role was ending. Scared me that I wouldn't know who I was without her needing me. That realization hit hard. It wasn't just about her pushing me away. It was about me clinging too tight. And that was something I could actually work on. I started small. Instead of cleaning her room obsessively, I left it mostly as is. I stopped buying her favorite snacks just in case she showed up. I deleted the weather app that let me check the forecast in her city. Each little act of letting go felt like pulling off a bandage sharp at first, then a slow relief. I also started writing. Not letters to her. I knew that wasn't what she needed, but in a notebook. I poured out all the messy feelings. The guilt, the fear, the loneliness, the stubborn, persistent hope. Getting it out of my head and onto paper made it feel less overwhelming. It was like building a raft in the middle of this ocean of silence, piece by piece. One evening, I sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and pink. The air smelled like wet grass and the first blooms of spring. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the crushing weight of absence. I just felt present. Sad, yes, missing her fiercely, but also aware of my own breath, my own heartbeat, my own place in this quiet moment. I realized I'd spent so much time focused on her life, on guiding it, worrying about it, that I'd forgotten to live my own. Who was I outside of being a parent? The question didn't scare me as much anymore. It felt like an invitation. The silence was still there. The hollow echoes still filled the house. But I was starting to learn how to live inside them. Not waiting for them to disappear, but finding ways to breathe within them. To grow, like those stubborn lettuce seeds, even in the shade. Spring turned warmer. The rain lessened. And slowly, quietly, I began to rebuild not the old life, but something new. Something that might, someday, have room for her again, on different terms. For now, I tended my small garden plot, wrote in my notebook, and learned to sit with the quiet. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. And maybe honesty, even painful honesty, was the only real foundation left to build on. Summer arrived hot and heavy, pressing down on the city like a damp blanket. The garden I'd started at the community center was thriving, rows of tomatoes ripening, zucchini spilling over their beds, sunflowers stretching tall toward the sky. My hands were rough now, nails often stained with soil, but there was a quiet satisfaction in it. I was learning to care for something without needing to control every outcome. Some plants grew wild, others needed staking. A few just didn't make it, and that was okay. Nature had its own rhythm, its own wisdom. I was just along for the ride, but even as my little patch of earth flourished, my heart still carried that familiar hollow space. I hadn't heard from her. Not a text, not a call, not even a birthday card. The silence had settled into something permanent feeling. Like furniture you learn to live around then, slowly. Bits and pieces began to drift back to me, not from her, but through the quiet channels of shared friends and distant connections. A mutual friend mentioned seeing her at a local art fair, looking tired but focused. Another said she'd moved apartments, somewhere smaller and cheaper, closer to the industrial part of town. Someone else casually noted she'd lost a big client. It's the one she'd been counting on all spring. Each snippet landed like a small stone in my chest. I wanted to rush over. To offer money? To say I told you so about that unstable freelance life. To wrap her in a blanket and fix everything. But I remembered her words. I'm an adult. And more importantly, I remembered my own promise to stay silent unless she reached out. So I swallowed the urge. Every single time. Instead, I sat with the worry. I let it sit in my stomach like a cold stone. I watered my tomato plants extra carefully that week. I walked longer routes just to tire my body out so my mind wouldn't race at night. I reminded myself that struggle isn't failure. That sometimes falling is how you learn to stand stronger. One evening, while sorting through old photos for a project at the community center, I came across a picture of her at 16. She was standing in front of her first art show at school, just a hallway display, really, but her face glowed with pride. She'd stayed up 3 nights straight finishing those pieces, arguing with me when I suggested she'd sleep instead. I'd worried she'd burn out, but she hadn't. She'd pushed through, created something beautiful, and owned it completely. That photo stayed with me. It reminded me that she'd always been stubborn, always been driven, always known how to fight for what mattered to her even when it scared me. Maybe this current struggle wasn't a sign she was failing. Maybe it was just another chapter in her becoming. I started paying attention differently, not to her choices, but to her resilience. The fact that she'd moved meant she was adapting. The fact that she was still showing up at art fairs meant she hadn't given up. Losing a client hurt, yes, but freelancers lose clients all the time. What mattered was what she did next, and I had to trust that she would figure it out. Not because I believed everything would magically work out, but because I finally understood that believing in her meant believing in her ability to handle hard things. Even if it broke my heart to watch from the sidelines, my own life kept shifting too. I'd started volunteering more regularly at the food bank attached to the community garden. Packing boxes of fresh produce felt good, tangible, useful. One afternoon, an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair asked if I wanted to help organize the donation closet. We worked side by side for hours, sorting canned goods and pasta boxes. She didn't ask personal questions. We just talked about the heat, the price of eggs, the stubbornness of zucchini plants. It was easy, real. Later, over shared thermoses of iced tea, she said something that stuck with me. She said you can love someone fiercely and still give them room to breathe. Sometimes the deepest love looks like stepping back and letting them find their own way, even if it's messy. I nodded, blinking fast. She didn't know my story, but she saw something anyway. And her words felt like permission. Permission to stop carrying the weight of fixing her life. Permission to just love her from afar. I also reconnected with an old friend I hadn't seen in years, a woman I used to hike with before life got busy with parenting and work. We met for coffee one Saturday morning. No talk of kids or drama. Just laughter over old memories and plans to walk a nearby trail the next weekend. It felt strange at first, like wearing shoes that almost fit. But good strange. Like remembering a part of myself I'd packed away slowly. My world expanded beyond the walls of my quiet house and the ache of missing her. I wasn't replacing her. Nothing could do that. But I was building a life that didn't collapse under the weight of her absence. I was learning to stand on my own 2 feet again. There were still hard days. Days when a song on the radio would remind me of driving her to school. Days when I'd depass a cafe and imagine her sitting inside sketching in her notebook. Days when the silence felt less like space and more like abandonment. On those days, I'd go to the garden. I'd pull weeds or harvest beans or just sit on the bench watching bees buzz between the flowers. Nature didn't rush. It didn't panic. It just kept growing, season after season, and I tried to do the same. One sweltering July afternoon, I got a call from a neighbor who knew her slightly. Just a quick hello, then casually mentioning she'd seen her lugging paint cans up 3 flights of stairs to her new place. Said she looked thin but determined. Said she smiled when she waved. That tiny detail she smiled stayed with me all day. It wasn't much, but it was something. It meant she hadn't disappeared. She was still her. Still fighting? Still creating? I didn't call the neighbor back for more details. I didn't try to track her down. I just held on to that image, the smile, the paint cans, the 3 flights of stairs, and let it warm me like sunlight. The summer wore on. Fireflies blinked in the dusk. Cicadas sang their endless song. And I kept tending my garden, my friendships, my own quiet heart. I wasn't waiting for her to come back anymore. Not in the desperate, clinging way I had before. I was living my life fully, right where I was. And somehow, that made the space between us feel less like a void and more like open ground waiting. Patiently, for whatever might grow there next. I still missed her, every single day. But the missing had changed. It wasn't sharp and panicked anymore. It was softer, deeper, more like love than fear. And for the first time in a long time, I felt okay with that. October came in with a bite in the air and leaves turning gold at the edges. The garden was winding down, tomato vines bare, sunflowers drooping heavy heads, the last of the zucchini hiding under broad leaves. I spent mornings pulling up spent plants, composting what I could, covering beds with straw for the winter. There was a quiet satisfaction in closing things down properly, preparing the earth to rest. My days had settled into a new rhythm. Mornings at the community garden or food bank, afternoons reading on the porch or walking through the crisp air, evenings with tea and my notebook, where I wrote less about missing her and more about small joys, the way frost glittered on spiderwebs, The taste of the first apple of the season? The deep orange of a pumpkin left too long on the vine. I still thought of her often, but it didn't ache like it used to. It was more like a soft hum in the background of my life, a familiar presence, even in absence. I'd stopped scanning crowds for her face, stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed. I'd made peace with the silence not because I liked it, but because I'd learned to live beside it without drowning. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, the mail brought something different. Just a plain white envelope, slightly bent from the journey. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I knew, instantly looping, confident, unmistakable. My breath caught. For a wild second, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe she was ready to talk, to come home, to fix everything, but I didn't tear it open right away. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the slight dampness from the rain. I remembered my promise to wait for her lead, not rush in, so I made a cup of tea first. Sat at the kitchen table, let myself feel the nervous flutter in my chest without acting on it. Finally, I opened it. Inside was no letter, just a single photograph. It showed her sitting cross-legged on a bare wooden floor in what looked like a small, bright room. Sunlight streamed through a large window behind her, catching dust motes in the air. Around her were sketch pads, tubes of paint, jars filled with brushes. Her hair was pulled back messily, there were smudges of color on her jeans, and her eyes were tired but calm, focused, at peace even. She wasn't smiling for the camera, but there was a quiet strength in her posture, in the set of her shoulders. Like she'd found her footing again. Tucked behind the photo was a small square of paper with just 3 lines. Made this thought you might like it, temp, that was all. No explanation, no apology, no questions. Just this offering a glimpse into her world shared freely, without expectation. Tears welled up fast, hot and sudden. Not tears of sadness, but of relief, of recognition. She was okay. Not perfect, not easy, but okay, and she'd chosen to show me that, in her own way. On her own terms, I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb. This wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a plea to come back. It was simply connection. A thread tossed gently across the distance we'd both needed. I didn't call. I didn't text right away. I let the gift sit with me for days. I looked at the photo every morning with my coffee. I studied the details of the books stacked neatly in the corner, the plant on the windowsill, the worn rug beneath her. It felt like being invited into her sanctuary, even if just for a moment. After a week, I knew what I needed to do. Not grand. Not pushy. Just honest. Just present. I picked up my phone and typed a single message, though. Colors are beautiful, thank you. Thinking of you, I stared at the screen for a long time. My finger hovered over send. Was it too much, too little? Would it scare her off? But then I remembered her photo. The calm in her eyes. The space she'd created for herself. She'd reached out. That meant she could handle a simple thank you. I pressed send, and then I put the phone down. Didn't stare at it, waiting for a reply. Went back to my book. Made dinner. Watered the few potted herbs still alive on the WINDOWSILL. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. Just one word thanks, that was it. No follow-up. No long conversation. But it was enough. More than enough. I framed the photo. Not in some fancy frame, but a simple wooden one I found at the thrift store. I hung it on the wall next to my bed, right where I'd see it first thing in the morning and last thing at night. It wasn't a replacement for having her here, but it was a reminder that she was living her life fully, that she was creating, that she was still my child, even as she built something entirely her own. Something shifted after that. The silence between us didn't disappear, but it changed texture. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility, full of respect. Full of the quiet understanding that we were both doing the hard work, her out in the world, building her path, and me here, learning to hold love without holding on. I started noticing beauty in small connections again. The way the mail carrier always waved. The shared smile with the cashier at the grocery store. the comfort of my gardening friend's steady presence, I realized I hadn't just been missing her. I'd been missing connection in general. And now, slowly, I was rebuilding it not just with her, but with the world around me. One Saturday, I went to the local art supply store. Not to buy anything specific, just to wander. I ran my fingers over sketchbooks, admired tubes of vibrant paint, remembered the smell of turpentine and charcoal. Standing there, I felt close to her in a way I hadn't in months. Not because I was trying to be part of her world, but because I was honoring what mattered to her even from afar. Later that week, I planted bulbs in my backyard. Tulips, daffodils, crocuses, things that would sleep through the winter and bloom in spring. It felt like an act of faith. Faith that time passes. Faith that seasons change. Faith that roots can grow even when you can't see them. I didn't know what would happen next between us. Maybe she'd reach out again soon. Maybe it would be months. Maybe our conversations would stay short and simple for a long time. And that was okay. What mattered was that the bridge was there. Fragile? Maybe. But real. She'd shown me her world. I'd thanked her. We'd both honored the space we'd needed. And in that quiet exchange, something precious had been restored, not the old relationship, but the foundation for a new one. One built on trust instead of fear. On respect instead of control. On seeing each other clearly as we truly were. As the days grew shorter and the air colder, I felt a quiet warmth inside. Not the frantic heat of worry, but the steady glow of hope. Hope that grows slowly like bulbs underground. Hope that doesn't need words to survive. Hope that simply waits patiently for the right time to bloom. 1 year to the day after she'd walked out of my kitchen with fire in her eyes and those words ringing in the air stop. Controlling my life? I'm an adult. The doorbell rang. I was folding laundry in the living room. The late January sun casting long shadows across the floor. My hand stilled. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be a delivery or a neighbor. But something deeper, quieter, new. I walked to the door and opened it. There she stood. Not the angry young woman from a year ago, not the tired artist from the photograph, but someone new, someone settled. She wore a thick sweater, her hair tucked behind her ears, and held 2 paper cups of coffee. Steam curled from the lids. Her eyes met mine, not with defiance, not with exhaustion, but with a softness I hadn't seen in a long time. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied. No grand speeches, no tears right away. Just that simple hello hanging gently between us in the cold air. I stepped back and she came in, shaking a few snowflakes from her coat before hanging it neatly on the hook. The same one she'd used since she was tall enough to reach it. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had broken open a year before. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the steam rising from the coffee cups. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was full. Full of everything we hadn't said, everything we'd learned, everything we were ready to try again. She wrapped her hands around her cup. Looking down for a moment before speaking, "I got a studio," she said finally. A real one. Small, but mine. Big window. Good light, that's wonderful, I said, and meant it. Not because it was stable or safe or what I would have chosen, but because it was hers. Because she'd fought for it. Built it. Owned it, she nodded, took a slow sip. Then she looked up, really looked at me. It wasn't easy this year, she admitted. Lost that big client early on. Had to move twice. Felt like giving up more than once. My chest tightened, but I didn't interrupt. Didn't offer solutions. Just listened. But I kept going, she said. Started showing work at little cafes. Got picked up by a small gallery. Not rich or anything. But it's working. On my terms, on your terms, I repeated softly. That mattered more than anything. She gave a small smile, then one that reached her eyes. Yeah, on my terms. And you know what I realized, Mom? What, that I needed that space. Badly. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I loved you so much, but I couldn't breathe. Every suggestion felt like a judgment. Like you didn't trust me to figure it out. I swallowed hard. Nodded. I'm sorry, I said. Truly, I thought I was protecting you. But I was just scared. Scared you'd fall? Scared you wouldn't need me anymore. She reached across the table then, her hand covering mine. Her fingers were cool, but her grip was steady. I'll always need you, Mom. Just not to run my life. The truth of it settled over me like warm sunlight. Simple. Clear. Right. We talked for hours. Not about fixing the past, but about building the future. She told me about her art, how it had changed, become bolder, more honest. How she'd learned to say no to projects that didn't feel true. How she'd started setting boundaries with clients, with friends, even with herself. I told her about the garden, about volunteering, about learning to sit with silence instead of filling it, about how I'd finally remembered who I was outside of being her mom. There were no dramatic declarations, no promises to never hurt each other again. Just two people, scarred but wiser, finding their way back to each other on new ground. Before she left, she stood by the door, pulling on her coat. Can I come back sometime? She asked. Just for coffee, of course, I said. Anytime she hugged me then, not the quick, polite hug of before, but a real one. Long, warm, full of everything words couldn't say. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. Thanks for waiting, she whispered. I touched her cheek. Just for a second, thank you for coming back after she left. I stood at the window watching her walk down the street, shoulders straight, head high. The snow had stopped. The world looked clean. New. Back inside, I picked up my coffee cup, now cold, and carried it to the sink. On the wall above the counter hung the photo she'd sent me months ago. I looked at it now and saw not just her solitude, but her strength. Her journey. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt open, ready. I didn't know what our new relationship would look like. Maybe visits would be occasional. Maybe calls would be short. Maybe we'd never go back to the easy closeness of before. And that was okay. Because what we had now was something deeper. Something earned. It wasn't built on control or fear or the need to fix each other. It was built on respect, on trust, on the quiet understanding that love doesn't mean holding on tight. It means letting go enough to let the other person truly be seen. I went to the back porch and looked out at the garden beds covered in straw. Underneath, the bulbs I'd planted months ago were sleeping, waiting. Growing roots, in the dark spring would come. Things would bloom. Not the same as last year. Maybe not even as pretty, but real. True. Alive. And so were we.